event at Labour Party conference, and people may be aware that we released a Britain 2030 report on Friday. That set out some of the challenges facing our country in a number of areas, including as we do try and ensure that our country can be fit for the green and digital future. It's Labour's view that we need to seize the opportunities of the digital revolution and take on the climate and ecological crisis, acting now to transition away from fossil fuels and clean up our environment. And we can do that, we believe, by ensuring that existing industries like steel and automotive can transition to a clean future, and jobs of the future that we really need. We need to do all that we can to back a flourishing homegrown manufacturing sector and a thriving energy industry with security of supply. We started the Industrial Revolution, of course, in the UK. Now we need to be owning the digital and green ones. And we also, of course, need to be harnessing technological change in all of its varieties. That, of course, includes with the digital world, where we need to make sure we have a digital transition that works for people, works for their lives, as well as working for those who own those technologies. And we need to consider how we can make sure that there's much broader engagement and control of those technologies into the future. So overall, we believe as Labour, if we do seize those opportunities, then by 2030, we can have radically cut emissions, we can reverse the decline of nature in our country, buy, make and sell more in Britain, manage a fair and prosperous transition to net zero, and close the digital divide and ensure those digital resources are much more fairly spread. In contrast, if we stay on current trends, then by 2030 we will be likely to see more climate delay and inaction, more missed climate targets, that we would be missing out on those green and digital jobs of the future, with a stark digital divide and an unmanaged, unplanned and unfair transition to net zero. So to talk about those very different visions and futures from the Conservatives compared to Labour, and what we need to be doing as a party into the future, what our country needs to be doing, and we couldn't have a better panel actually than the one I've got in front of me now. We had a great discussion in the previous hour. I think we're going to have a really good discussion in this hour too. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers in turn, and then there will be time for a discussion afterwards. So I'm absolutely delighted as our first speaker to have with me Dr. Melanie Smallman. Those of you who know SERA well, the campaigning voice for the environment within Labour, will I'm sure know Melanie very well. She's the Associate Professor in Science and Technology Studies and Co-Director of UCL's Responsible Research and Innovation Hub. She's also the founder and director of the UK's first science communication consultancy, Think Lab. My goodness, we need that, I must say, particularly the current government. And for 8 years, she was an advisor to DEFRA's chief scientific advisor as well, and tasked with rebuilding public confidence in DEFRA's use of science in the aftermath of BSE and foot-and-mouth disease. So we're really pleased that you're with us now, Melanie, and looking forward to your comments on this important issue.
Thanks. So I'll say what I said last night. I talk really loudly and I'm Welsh, so I'm quite aspirate. I also got a degree in virology, that wasn't on the list. And really, everybody should be wearing a mask in this room and in all of the rooms, unless you want Lady Cockles to be super spread event. There's some over there if you haven't bought one. But for your safety, as much as mine, because I am breathing out, I don't know what's in me, and you will get it if I've got it right now. So, I came to conference, and the past year, so I'm a lecturer at UCL, basically, in my day job. And the last year, I teach science policy, and watching my worst nightmares, both personally and academically, unfold and politically, I guess, unfold in the UK has been, quite a distressing experience for me. So I came to conference not, if I'm being honest, not in the happiest frame of mind that I've ever been in my life. And then on Sunday night, we had a meeting, I don't know if anyone was there, down on the beach in a marquee, where we were celebrating the wind farm, the offshore wind farm. And Sue, you were there, I think.
Oh,
yes. And it wasn't just the wine, it was a lovely event because we heard about, this offshore wind farm. It's powering 300,000 homes. So those turbines that you see out at sea is about half of Sussex's energy needs are being supplied by that. And more than, that cheered me up, but more than that, we heard about the jobs, we heard about the... This was a story of the future. This is the story of where this should be a normal. And I felt really kind of buoyed up that there are other things going on in the world, not just the awful stuff that we live with on a day-to-day basis. And I think the document that the Labour Party have produced and that we're talking about today really is kind of bringing that, pushing that forward in a meaningful and a deliberate way. There's one line in it, and it says that if we don't action this plan, the risk is that we have unmanaged, unplanned, and an unfair transition. And the main thing I disagree with the document is that it's not that we will have, that's what we've got now. When we see sky-high energy prices, they're not going to stay sky-high, they're going to go up, down, up, down, up, down. We are in an unstable future because of 10 years of a government that does not plan, that these things happen by accident, and just doesn't. We've seen with COVID, we've got two things going on. Both aspects of my life are full of misery. So there's the climate change. I'm very optimistic at the end of it. The climate change, we've got the unplanned, unmanaged, and unfair transition to a low-carbon future on one hand, and with that, the same unplanned, unmanaged, unfair transition to a digital future. And in my day job, I look at the impact of digital technologies on communities and individuals, and I promise digital technologies are driving inequality in the UK, in most developed countries. What they call business plans are exactly happening in the UK. And so the sort of three comments that I just want to make, the things that I think are really missing from that document, and the piece of work that we as a Labour Party have to do, is think really hard about what that means. How does national investment in innovation play out for local job markets and local economies? How can we scale up? How can we have a digital economy which is not a surveillance state? So, these technologies, they drive inequality, they hollow out the job market, they reward white men extremely well. These digital industries that are driving the gender pay gap in the UK at the moment. Digital technologies come with massive amounts of data collection and surveillance and lend themselves to authoritarian regimes much more easily than any other form of technology. How do we get a grip on that? We don't want to live in that kind of world. And lastly, if we look at the two things together, there is an energy cost with digital technologies. So, the story, I don't know if anyone knows, there's a shop on the seafront. You can buy Bitcoin. So the global Bitcoin mining industry, if you can call it that, it produces nothing, produces as much carbon dioxide each year as the whole of London. And the IT sector, data storing, so all of the cloud storing from Gmail and Yahoo and whatnot, at the moment it uses about 1% of the world's energy supply. It's predicted by 2030 to possibly be up to 30% of electricity, not energy. So, digital and low carbon are not the same things. We have to be very deliberate. If we want a low carbon future, if we want a digital future, and if we want a more equal future, there's a lot of work for us to do, because good things don't happen with technology by accident, as Boris Johnson has shown us.
Absolutely, I think we'd all agree with that. It's a really big challenges for us to be facing up to there, Melanie. Thank you very much for setting that out to all of us just now. We've now got as our next speaker Maria Exel, and many of you will know her. She's someone who is very well known in the trade union movement, of course, for all of her industrial activity over many years within the telecommunications sector. She's been working within the Communication Workers Union at a senior level for a very long time, and she's also a member of the TUC executive and the vice chair of Labour unions as well. So we're really looking forward to your reflections on these issues, Maria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Anneliese. I'm here today to to explain our union's approach to our communication sector and how that intersects with various issues that have already been raised, although we're coming to it very much from that perspective. Our union believes that the public ownership of communications can create possibilities of economic, social and ecological transformation. We believe the pandemic has shown the importance of the comms infrastructures to our society, from delivery drivers, postal workers, telecom engineers and tech support staff. The vast majority of our members have been working away from home during the pandemic, delivering essential services. We always knew they were essential services, we think everyone knows they are now. In a post-pandemic world, we believe Labour should be rebuilding in a way that responds to what the pandemic has laid bare. The public ownership and control of utilities are necessary, and that key workers, and indeed all workers, should have job security and decent paying conditions. And today I will concentrate my contribution on our critique from our experience of the market-based regulatory system in telecoms and how it holds the country back. We have three main areas of concern. The first is the way in which the current system distorts and holds back economic development. The second is how it creates misordered social priorities. And thirdly, obviously, issues around the labour market. We believe telecoms is a natural monopoly, but the current regulatory system, which is more or less unchanged, by the way, since Thatcher's privatisation, despite a large period of time of the Labour government, actually took advantage, the whole way that Thatcher set it up when the privatisation happened, took advantage of the public investment that had already been made in the sector, and the profitability that was developed in what was comms technology explosion at the end of the 20th century. Now we're in the next phase of it with the digital. So it's there, it's happening. It's who profits from it, how those profits are distributed. The current regulatory model has been found wanting, both in terms of rational planning of services, I make no apologies for emphasising rational planning of services, and consistent investment to develop services for the future. Just on the micro level about that, issues around the reliability, speed and access to broadband. We all know now how essential that is. And despite a lot of money being spent on the sector, because of unnecessary duplication of services, use of substandard technologies as quick fixes, driven by short-term gains, profitability, and also market different sectors of the market, we've not had the development that we could have had even for the private sector investment that there has been. The competitive model of regulation has been efficient at sharing the profits between major firms, but less efficient at sustained investment. There's feasts and famines of investment, and also it's not been very efficient at delivering a consistent quality of service to both business customers and to residential customers. As with all market-based regulatory systems, a lot of money is made by sorry about the gender thing, middlemen, and some of them are women as well, rather than actually investing into the improving the services with a view to the future. There's a whole load of financial stuff that's on the back of, comms being a very one of the second most profitable industry in the world. Financial people remember the telecom bubble, and then also, the way in which you have the auctions and the money that's spent on that, and the way in which the regulatory structures are organised in terms of which firm is allowed to do which, and constraining BT's monopoly. A lot of money and energy is spent into that, and it means little. It means little in terms of what's actually provided, and it's actually harmful. It stops proper, as I said, rationally planned development. There's also, our industry. We're in the infrastructure business. We're in the providing, if you like, the railway bits, and whether people own the trains and run on them, it's the same. The content-driven aspects of technology in many ways are driving some of the development of the services, and that's, on one level, that's always going to be. But we were chatting earlier, weren't we, Sue, about how I was saying that the particular beef we have is the fact that the football industry is a big factor in the planning of BT and Sky. They decide a lot of the distributions of services on the basis of deals that are done on content with people. And that's not a rational way of looking at things. It may not be the social priorities we want, although of course football is very important and part of the common good. We had this discussion earlier, but it's not the only thing, and that's been one of the major factors. The content matter raises serious questions like what values would we as a society want for the development of essential services of telecoms. The digital divide is well documented, and it's one of the focus of the motion that we put to conference, which was overwhelmingly agreed. The fact that the life choices and digital divide affects people's life choices. It affects the way in which different communities can participate. We've seen it hand out in terms of working class kids' access to the services they need to actually have an education over the last 2 years. But it's also about the future. We know the future is going to be, accelerated. We know AI, autonomy, automation, and all the other developments of digital connectivity. It's only the beginning. So if we can't get the values right now, it's not going to work, is it? We believe telecoms can be a catalyst for social liberation. We think new social relations that are created by technological change should actually be allied with universal access and connectivity as the important guiding principles. We believe we're in a new phase of development of our human nature as technological beings. The massive potential there is in the development of technologies. It expands human wants, and it has the possibility of meeting more human needs. And we should be, that's a values question. It's a question of economic development, it's a values question, moral economy and all that. And also we'll warn that how we do this matters, because if we don't have the right values in terms of the development of technology, we actually create tech monsters that oppress us. The democratic control that public ownership allows, very difficult to see how you could have that level of democratic control without public ownership, means that we can provide services that align with egalitarian principles, and that marginalised communities can have the services they need, and we can deal with a lot of the regional imbalances, big issues in our economy. And there are environmental implications of connectivity that we can't even imagine at the moment. I'm not an expert on them, maybe other people here can develop them more, but we know that would have a very important environmental implication. Just sort of the third area of concern that we have is obviously the way in which the current system affects the market, and that's obviously our interest as trade unionists care about the jobs and paying condition of our members, but it goes quite bigger than that. It directly affects services. There's a race to the bottom between firms, and the issue will be who can provide the cheapest bit. It's not always what you want. There's the issue of training standards, there's competition. So, there's a bit of that's one. And obviously, well documented again in our industry. The irony that in the tech sector, the idea that the hours have got shorter, actually some of them have got longer. The benefits of technology, even in the sector where we're providing it, it's not there. And also, again, the irony of those of us who are technology workers, the way technology is used to survey us and other workers for surveillance problems. And I'm just speaking just parochially, because I'm a trade unionist in London, we're seeing actually interesting regional imbalances. BT is cut. We had a big dispute with BT about the job security of our higher tech members. We're based in London in the south. So obviously that work can be moved out almost anywhere in Britain, and actually it's partly a desert now of people who are providing that high tech services. So it's always going to be a matter of where they can save the money rather than where you would want maybe high tech jobs to be in different parts of the sector. I'm coming to a conclusion. Just two last points, if I can, Anneliese, if that's all right. We believe the case for public ownership is necessary for social justice and for a sort of values-based economic development. But we also believe it's a vote winner for Labour. We've proposed, and it's in our motion, and we've also made this point for several years, that parts of BT that deliver the broadband infrastructure that's become so obvious that we actually need to sustain should be brought into public ownership. Our union policies for the whole telecom sector. But we've got to start somewhere, and that's the subject of the motion, and that's what we're asking for at the moment, and it's passed a conference. We know that, and we're not naive, we know the opposition from a very profitable industry, from the businesses involved. So it's all more important for Labour to get its act together now about how we can plan for that, how we can predict, how we can make the case. Can't leave it to 6 weeks before, or maybe 2 weeks before, perhaps, manifesto. Although we were very pleased that the issue went up the political agenda. So there's nobody two ways. People say it was too late, on the other hand, it was overdue. So I'm just putting it that way. I'm being very diplomatic there, aren't I? And then my last point, I suppose, is just the ecological. Having said that there are massive environmental implications, they are, but they're really big. They're really big. We can't dwell in harmony on a planet when we can't don't take control as a species of our own technological nature and its productivity, its creativity, how it can be harnessed by acting cooperatively for the common good. Because if we don't do that, if we don't have the right values-based view of our technological development, we'll be enthralled to monsters of distorted creation, instrumentalism and greed that most people who care about the future of the planet mention. And that's the sort of thing that kills our bodies and souls. That's our instrumentalism and greed, when actually we could be unleashing our human creativity and supporting each other and acting according to Labour values. Basically, we believe technology should serve the people, not enslave them.
Well, that's quite a vision, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed, Maria. And just to say, by the way, I've had a message from Ed Miliband's team that he is trying to get here, but he's, as you might expect, currently there's kind of emergency discussions going on with HGV drivers and their representatives, so I'm sorry, that's why he's not here yet, but he is going to try and get here just in the middle of those, given the current crisis. I'm very pleased that now I'll be able to bring in Sue Farms to give her reflections on these issues. Many of you may well know Sue. She's the Deputy General Secretary at Prospect, which is the Union for Professionals. Her responsibilities in Prospect are the union's work across the energy sector, climate change and gender equality. She's been incredibly effective around a number of the different workplaces that have had challenges there. She's certainly lobbied me many times around, and very happy to work with her on them. She is the TUC president for 2021-22, chair of the Women's Committee and TUC aid trustee, and she's the General Council's lead on energy, environment and sustainability. So she really is an expert to be addressing some of these issues with us this morning. So thanks very much, Sue, for being with us just now.
Thanks very much. In a few minutes available to me, I want to start by saying I think that green skills and digital skills are absolutely essential to the transformation we need to make in our economy. But to agree with the way that those transitions are being made at the moment is likely to entrench inequalities in our labour market and our society. So I want to make a few points about each, about the green agenda and about the digital agenda. I was at the same reception as Melanie on Sunday evening, and it was great. It was a very upbeat reception, and we should celebrate the success of the offshore wind industry. But we need to do more than that. We need to see accelerated deployment of a range of clean technologies. And I think that means that we need an active green industrial strategy, as Labour have argued, not a 10-point plan with vague aspirations as to where we might get to, but actually a proper industrial strategy that sets out a pathway and really gets us there. And we haven't got that at the moment. And part of that industrial strategy must focus not just on deployment, but on increasing UK content in our clean technologies. We've seen that in some technologies the UK is world leading in deployment, and wind is a good example of that. But our ambition should be greater. It should relate not just to deployment, but to development, design and manufacturing, because the truth is that despite the success of that industry, the UK hasn't captured all the benefits, the economic value that it should have, or translated it into jobs. And some research that my union did a couple of years ago found that at a time when renewables deployment was increasing in the UK, UK jobs were actually decreasing. And we need to do something about that. And I think that needs a new partnership between government, industry and unions, which will also cover the supply chain. I think there's a question actually about what the financing model is and whether the contracts for difference, which have been so successful in driving down costs, have reached a point where they are driving down costs too much and inhibiting investment in skills and careers for our members. And of course, on the issue of jobs, just transition is a vital agenda. It's something now that we hear politicians across parties talking about, but actually I think we're beyond the point of talking about it, and we need to get on and do it. And there's only one party, I think, who is serious in their intent to do that, and that is, of course, Labour. And we are, as unions, working very closely with the Shadow BEIS team on their strategy for just transition. I had the opportunity to work on this through the Green Jobs Task Force. And what I would say unashamedly is I think that is a good report. The question is, what will the government actually do to implement the recommendations in that report? So I think, there's a lot there to do. There is some success to build on, but we need really to do this in social partnership if we're going to maximise the benefits. In relation to the digital agenda, Maria's talked a lot about the sector, and that's her area of expertise. But I think what I do want to say is that digital skills are not just for people who work in digital sectors, and we need to be thinking about that, because digital technology, as we've seen, is reshaping all of our working lives. Now, before the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about automation, robots and so on, and the impact that was having on workers, for example, in distribution, in some of the companies like Amazon and so on. But actually, we've seen that impact spread, haven't we, during the technology, a much wider range of jobs. Most obviously in home, but let's be clear, that's not an opportunity that has been available to everybody. And we do, and there seems to be a headlong rush into this, and I think we do need to think very carefully about this, because I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution. We don't want to see workers forced to work from home in order to save money for companies. I think it would be a really wrong step if the interactions all took place on screen, because I think workers become more disposable to their employers when that's the case. And of course, it doesn't fit everybody's lifestyle. So working from home is one aspect of flexibility, but flexibility needs to be much wider than that, and we need to ensure we don't end up living at work rather than working from home. And of course, how are workers being surveyed while they are working from home? We did some polling in the spring that found that 1 in 4 people who were working remotely were already under surveillance. And we've been exploring how we can use rules around data protection to challenge this use and push back against things like algorithms for recruitment and performance management, which actually have a really negative equality impact. So the basic principle, of course, is that technology must be introduced in consultation with the workforce. And I would argue that that would result in better and more sustainable outcomes. And finally, I just want to mention the campaign on the right to disconnect in the UK, which my union has done work on because of the blurred boundaries between work and home life. And I think we redraw that boundary, and it's not impossible to do that. We see it in other countries, France and Ireland, for example. And we very much welcome the fact that Labour has picked up this idea and it's now party policy. So I think that's an agenda too for us to work on together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. That's given us so much food for thought. And if I can pass on now to Hamish Sanderson from Labour Business. We're really grateful to Labour Business for co-sponsoring this event as well as SERA. It's been brilliant to have their engagement in Stronger Together. Hamish is a lawyer by trade. He's a partner in the international law firm Field Fisher, specialising in IT law, very helpful for this discussion. intellectual property and public procurement. But he's also been very, very active in the Labour Party as well. He's on the executive committee of LFIG, which many of you will be aware of, Labour Finance and Industry Group, since 2013. He was elected as chair in 2015, and he stood as Labour's co-leading prime minister. Pleased to have you with us. I'm looking forward to your remarks.
Well, thank you very much for the a little bit. We're now known as Labour Business. LFIG was historic name. We were founded by Harold Wilson in 1972. You see the banner there. You may remember he used to talk about making Labour the natural party of government. So in a little nod to his founding role, we talk about making Labour the natural party of business. And it's really music to my ears when I hear Ed and Rachel and indeed Keir talk about how we must project ourselves as an unashamedly pro-business party, as well as an unashamedly pro-worker and pro-trade union party. And that's the partnership that we want to see. And what this means to us in terms of the agenda we're discussing today is that business and the private sector more broadly, as well as the social enterprise sector and the charity sector, must be part of the solution to the issues that we are talking, but in partnership with a future Labour government and with trade unions and their members. So I strongly endorse what Sue said about the social partnership concept, and I'm going to come back to that with an example from Wales, where I live. So as you noted, my background is in technology law. I'm also the chair of a small digital media company, not one of the big ones. And I wanted, therefore, to focus more on the digital divide as part of this debate. And you asked us to give us some initial comments on your two excellent reports, and I'd like to do that, because you deserve a lot of credit for that. I want to share that with you all. To talk about the examples of where Labour in power, I've mentioned Wales, but you could mention Metro Mayors and other, and highlighting, spotlighting, applauding, celebrating the work that they're doing on the range issues we've identified in the That's really important. So, to give just one example, we banned fracking in Wales. Simple as that. But that's just the power to do so in the Welsh government, the Senate. And in the context of Welsh governance, I wanted to come back to the social partnership that was mentioned, because in Wales we've actually codified a social partnership act, a statute applying only to Wales, which requires the government to consult with businesses and trade unions before proposing or implementing any legislation. And that was already happening, but this is simply a codification of that practice. And it was inconceivable that in Wales we would do anything in relation to the pandemic, let alone in relation to the climate crisis, without talking to something. An important context in which policy is made. So I strongly endorse what's been said about that. Turning to the Britain 2030 report, it does highlight the digital divide, and Maria has referred to that as well. And we strongly supported your motion on the digital divide in conference. As a socialist society, we have a delegate at conference, and he's been voting for us, and that was one of the motions that he voted for. And I think it's important to stress that the digital divide is about a number of things. It's about job opportunities, because there are many jobs which are simply not accessible to anybody, whatever their circumstances, without certain digital skills. And that's absolutely clear. Secondly, there's the obvious stuff like the digital divide that results from the lack of broadband. And living in rural Wales, I can tell you there are some no spots, not spots. Little coverage in where I live, so it's quite a challenge to do any work from. Users of all public services and private services, and I want to just highlight that. So we've been working with, surprising this perhaps to this audience, with banks, large banks, on digital inclusion. So we had a session last night on the things with NatWest, where we talked about inclusive regional recovery, and they outlined to us some of their investments in that agenda, which are quite impressive. But today at 12:30, we've got an event with MasterCard, and we've also been engaged with them, because that's part of what Labour Business does, is business engagement. Because, you know, I mentioned Harold Wilson, he said, unless we listen to business, we can't get business to listen to us. So we've been talking to MasterCard, and we came up with an event called Financial Inclusion, which is about ensuring that everybody from every socio-economic and ethnic and age and disability background, whatever their circumstances, had access to something as fundamental as money, as cash. And that applies to all private and public services, obviously, not just to banking. And we called it financial inclusion. They said, no, let's call it digital and financial inclusion, because we cannot provide a banking service to anybody without their digital skills being able to access it. So they've come up with some quite interesting work, which I'll be describing in a bit more detail at the event at 12:30. They've got a program called Strive UK, and I just wanted to mention that they are investing $250 million over 5 years. Not a huge amount relative to the need, but nonetheless, it's a statement of intent to support micro and small businesses globally, and helping small businesses with under 10 employees through data-driven tools, training and service can help with their resilience and obtaining that. I think I mentioned that not to say that's the answer or the whole answer, but to say that there is a huge opportunity here for us to work with business. And really at this conference, and I mentioned and others about being an unashamed business. We're talking the talk for the first time, but we're not. We've got to put some flesh on the bones of those slogans, because it's easy to say we're pro-business. What does that mean? So our view of Labour Business is we've got to work with all businesses, small, medium and large, to drive forward that digital inclusion agenda. And to put the flesh on the bones, we look forward to working with you and your team, Anneliese, and Ed and your team on giving some content to our slogan of being pro-business and pro-worker. So that's my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Hamish, and I'm really pleased that Ed has been able to join us. I did convey the fact that obviously you're having to deal with a very difficult situation that we're in currently around fuel security and energy supply, of course, something that you've worked on for many, many years, and it's no news, I'm sure, to everybody here that, of course, it was Ed who put into place that Climate Change Act in 2008, that absolutely landmark piece of legislation, and he's continuing that critically important work now as our Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Really exciting announcements from Ed around decarbonisation of existing industry that we saw very recently during this conference. So it's great. Really looking forward to your comments now, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anneliese. I think I will stand up. You said we heard from me during the conference. I know that with day 4 of conference, we probably feel like we've been here 4 weeks. There's something about conference time and real time, and they sort of, one day of conference is like a week, is the way I tend to. Tend to think. That doesn't mean we're not having a good time, but it does mean that it has a certain time acts in funny ways. Look, I know we've want to have time for some questions from the floor, so I won't speak for ages. I do want to say what a pleasure it is to share the platform with Maria and Sue and Melanie and Hamish, and particularly Anneliese, who I think is an absolutely brilliant choice to be the head of our policy review, because of her breadth of knowledge, her values, her passion for making society better. And I think that she's made such an important and the opportunities. I mean, we all know the challenge. We all know we're in a decisive moment. And if we don't act now, it's going to be too late to keep 1.5 degrees alive in terms of restricting the temperature increases. But there's also a massive opportunity when it comes to jobs and business, and this is the economy of the future. And, you know, I think I was actually in this room last night, I think it was in this room, at a SERA event, and so I sort of, sorry to quote myself, that's one of the other things you tend to do at conference. But you know, I think we are in the sort of dream business, not just the nightmare business. In other words, we want to avoid the nightmare of climate breakdown, but we also have a vision of a better society as we rise to this climate emergency. And that is about warm homes for people and ending fuel poverty. It is about good jobs at decent wages. It is about green spaces for all. You know, it's about the way we live together. It's about our public transport system and our transport system, the way we get around. The way I sort of think about it is, are we really saying we're going to go through this massive transformation of the country, and we're going to go from the high carbon, unjust, unequal world to the zero carbon, unjust, unequal world? Well, I mean, imagine doing all that. Imagine going through that whole business and then saying, well, we're going to keep all the existing inequalities we have as a society. We're just going to do it at zero carbon, not high carbon. And you know, I think at best that's what the Tories will achieve, but we've got to be in the business of creating the fair and more equal society that we believe. So that's the first point I wanted to make. Second point is, and Anneliese has spoken eloquently about this. What is the big absence when it comes to this government, when it relates to climate? It isn't intention, or hot air, or rhetoric, or quoting Kermit the Frog at the United Nations. That isn't their deficiency. It's a sense of a plan. There's just no sense of a plan. So in 2009, I produced a low carbon, there was not zero carbon when I was Energy Secretary. Going back and reading your own plan is also a slightly odd thing to do, but I went back and read it the other day. And okay, you don't get everything right when you write a plan for 10 years, 20 years hence, but at least it gave a sense of direction for industry, for the private sector, for the country about where we were trying to head, and for government. And the thing that strikes me about this government is they have absolutely no sense. So we're, you know, on nuclear, on renewables, on all kinds of issues, energy efficiency. We're just sort of bubbling around as a country, not being clear about what the direction of travel is. And so, overarching plan with business in each area, we need to have a sense of what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean for the car industry? What does it mean for the steel industry? What does it mean for the retrofit industry? And if we have that sense of a plan, actually we'll get somewhere. And so, you know, we commitment yesterday around green investment. And I think that gives us the investment, the public investment, which will lead to private investment, which can now form the basis for us of developing that sense of the zero carbon transition and Labour zero carbon. I'm just announcing this, but first, there's a big announcement here. Yeah, we can have a Labour zero carbon, why don't we just decide, a Labour zero carbon transition plan, which then goes sector by sector and says, this is how we're going to do it. Because then I think, actually, if you do that, then you can make progress. Last point I just want to make is this, it goes back to something you said earlier about the positive vision. What's the thing that could really derail us? And this is something that Anneliese and I have talked about a lot over the last 18 months. What's the thing that could really derail us in relation to this climate crisis? In domestic action. It's not public willingness. It's not public belief that there's a problem. It's not public enthusiasm, with lack of public enthusiasm for action. It's a sense of, is it going to be fair? Is it going to be fair to me? Is it going to be fair to my family? Or are you going to end up making me? Or is it going to be the rich who can afford to go green, the sort of luxury choice? And if you're middle or lower income, then you ended up having to just pay lots more and money you can't afford. And you know, that's got to be at the centre of our thinking. And that fairness piece is about consumers, and it is absolutely about workers as well. It is absolutely about the just transition and whether we take working people with us or not. We cannot have what happened to the coal industry in the 1980s and all that meant for our coalfield community. But look, I think this is an emergency. This is a very, very sort of dire situation when it comes to the climate crisis. But I think we can be optimistic that this is an agenda that through this policy review, through this process, we can seize this agenda. We can and must seize this agenda. And however long it is until an election, we can, particularly with the announcement made yesterday, we can now be the people who receive this agenda and lead the debate, and that's what we've got to do. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed for those inspiring words. We have got 10 minutes left. I want to try and take as many people who want to ask questions as possible. So to enable that, if you can try and make them quick, that would be amazing, so we can get as many people in as we possibly can. So could I have the gentleman with the first? Yeah.
Hi, Phil White from 99% organisation. We talked about government planning or lack of government planning. I wanted a quick question about the long-term future of digital technologies. We've seen how discriminatory they can be used when used for things like artificial intelligence in recruitment, surveillance and so on. When do we need to do something? That might be rhetorical. When do we need to do something and what do we need to do to manage the future of those so that we have a say in the future in 20 years' time?
Thank you very much, Phil. And there was somebody near the back. Yeah, gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Michael Ahanshian, Labour Business Future of Work. Just wanted to build on what Ed was saying around a positive vision. And I wanted to understand from the panel what their thoughts were about how we can create this sort of partnership between businesses, ordinary people to make the right choices and government.
Thank you very much. And the woman at the back, there we go.
Thank you. I'm Rosie, I work at Google. I wanted to make two really quick comments. One on data and servers. Just to reassure you, Gmail has been carbon neutral since 2007. It'll be carbon negative by 2030. So when you are sending your Gmails, don't worry too much. But the comment on that is, we are going carbon negative by 2030 because we strongly believe you have to go, and businesses have to go beyond emit and remove to just stopping using carbon in the first place. So how is that going to be baked into Labour's vision of getting businesses to make sure that carbon is just not on the table in the first place and emit and remove is not an acceptable standard when it comes to emissions? Second, skills. We have recently started working with Planet Mark and the government on a small scheme to help small businesses do green training. So this is how you use technology to do things like paperless billing, or making choices about your cloud, or making choices through technology as a small business to make that stuff stronger. Small businesses, to the point that everyone was making, need that help. What more can we do to bake in that kind of training, these kind of schemes, to make sure small businesses have that training, have that access, not just consumers? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Then last question, gentleman with the t-shirt that's got yellow. Yeah, there we go. Got a bike on it. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just wondering about export, thinking about high-skilled jobs and the opportunities with export and making a major difference around, on a global way for climate change. I just thought we've got such a fantastic opportunity in the UK to massively export over the next 10 years.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to be very draconian. Sorry, panel. I'm going to allocate each of you to different aspects of those questions, so I hope you won't mind. Maybe if I could start off, Maria, to yourself about that question on the long-term future of digital and the role of government planning there. You can focus on it a bit in your remarks, but what else would you say on that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously majored on the issue around control of ownership and control of the infrastructure, but there are much other, the other issues you talk about, AI and if you like, the regulation of the use of. And we know, don't we, that that's a really big area in terms of social media companies and that issue, and how obviously it makes it more difficult with Brexit, but and the European control. So that's where I would see it, because I measured on those issues. But of course, the points about data, the use of data, people's personal data, the way in which the firms that the firms need to find some sort of model that doesn't treat them as 20th century publishers, but also recognises that they can't be be treated as they are now. I think those are the areas that sort of regulation control of regulation of content is really key as well.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Maria. If I could please ask Sue the last question about exports and high-skilled jobs.
Thank you. So, succinct answer to this. I talked about the importance of us not just deploying technologies, but being involved in the R&D, the development and the design. And the point about that really is building that capacity and that critical mass of expertise from R&D through to deployment and in the supply chain. And I think if we do that, then we have got a fantastic export potential. And if we look at countries, for example, like Denmark, with its success in wind technology, that's what they've done. And the key factors of this is they've got an industrial strategy that's long-term, and they've stuck with it across more than one political cycle. And I think that's what we need as well. So I think it's about building capacity, building skills, having that clarity of strategy, and government support where we need it. And I think we need to do that at a national level. And I think we also need to be very conscious about place and geography and the particular areas of expertise that exist in hubs now, which need to be developed for the future.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Melanie, that question about, maybe if I rephrase it a little bit, about essentially, is it good enough to emit but then mitigate? Wouldn't it be better to just not emit in the first place? I'm pretty sure what Melanie's going to say in response to that. Anyway,
It seems whenever I talk about my academic work, Google turn up, so there's a lot of you like, so that's good and funny. But yeah, of course it's not good enough. And I think, you know, I've done work both through SERA and in my day job around stuff like carbon capture, storage. It is necessary if that's the approach. And so there's not a lot of public support for it. And when I talk to groups of citizens, technologies, they've just looked at me as if, you know, have you lost your mind? Have you done nothing? We've been here with nuclear, you can't get rid of waste. People understand that if we make too much carbon dioxide, it's got to go somewhere. So obviously, you know, I think that we have to find ways that we don't produce the carbon in the first place. And I think that given the increase in energy use that comes with increased digitisation, it's becoming an increasingly massive challenge. And I mean, if I can just say in response, because I think your point about inequalities within AI is really important. There's a lot of people doing work about those kind of inbuilt biases. What I think is an even bigger problem, so I'm not dismissing that that's a problem, but people are conscious of it. What I think is an even bigger problem is the inequalities come from the implementation of AI. So once you buy that technology, you've committed to the shape of service. So I do work on AI in the NHS, and we cannot have regional and local services if we buy high-tech solutions, just because of the scale of costs. And you can't switch an AI diagnostic machine to vaccinating people during a pandemic. So you lose huge flexibility, and the NHS becomes a particular shape that we may not have chosen with technology. So, you know, there's really, really serious implications about fairness, access that come hand in hand with technologies. And like I said, I'm pro-technology, but good things don't come from technologies unless you make sure they come from them.
And on that note, I think Hamish, you wanted to come back in on privacy.
Yes, I'm just picking up what Cyril said about the use of digital technologies. I mean, you've raised a massive question. We don't have time for all of the ramifications of it. I just pick out 2 points. One, for me, as a lawyer who's done a fair bit of data protection work, I think privacy is the number. We have to have a new regime, unless the new regime of intellectual property rights, in which users of technology own their own data. It's as simple as that. Why is it that we don't own the data that's been harvested from our use of digital technology? That is wrong. But secondly, the big issue for me, and there's a business implication here, is taxation. And I don't want to rubbish Google because they're not alone, but let's be honest, it is a scandal that the big tech companies do not pay their fair share of tax in national jurisdictions prepared with bricks and mortar companies and even digital companies which are active locally. That has to change. We're working with the Tax Justice Network on solutions to that problem. But for both of the points I've just made, privacy and taxation, you'll notice that they are only capable of a global solution. So we've got to act globally. But it's of real importance to our business community, because what businesses hate most is an unfair and unlevel playing field, which is what we've got, and that has ramifications right across their business resilience and indeed their survival.
Well, on that subject, can we pick up the question about the partnership between government and business that was asked about, Ed?
Yeah, look, I think it's important. There's definitely scope for a very, very successful partnership on this. I mean, if you take the steel industry, I mean, it's just such an interesting area because both sides of Parliament agree that we need a steel industry. It's strategically important for our country. It's the basis of much of the rest of our manufacturing. It's incredibly important for the community. But it faces a massive challenge, which is it's got to go green and it's got to change all its processes essentially. And it's going to cost about £6 billion in the UK. Now we're saying we'll partner with the private sector to make it happen. Because it's, do we want to have what's happening related to gas happen in relation to steel? Well, we are totally dependent on the international, or very dependent on the international market. That is the danger. And in a way that the interesting about the Conservative position, it says we think it's strategically important industry, but we're really not going to do anything to actually make it fit for the future and to deliver. And that is the sort of recipe. So, and one example, we're talking about automotive or offshore wind or hydrogen or a whole range of other areas, retrofit, there's a whole range of other areas where I think there's a huge partnership. And the last point I'll just make is this, because you haven't really talked about it. You talked about the public, and I mentioned it, but I think, personally, I think you need a permanent version of the climate assembly that was done, the deliberative process. Because if you're going to take the public with you, you've got to invite the public in. And I think it's really interesting that lots of our local authorities are doing this really well, have done this locally. But I think a one-off event, which is what we did, which was really good, it was set up by the select committee for the deliberation, was a really valuable event. But it's got to be when we're embarking or in the midst of this massive transition, taking the public with us, and not just sort of trying to do the right thing, but inviting the public to participate in the process seems to me to be absolutely crucial. So I think it's a really sort of good point, maybe a good point to end on, is this partnership between government, business, and the public is the way forward.
Absolutely, and of course trade union movement too, and I think we're all united in that, and I think we've had a really important discussion just now. Thank you so much, everyone who's taken part in this, really appreciate it. Above all, thanks to these brilliant panellists, they cantered through so much in a short space of time, and anybody wants to can join us for the main event for Stronger Together, which is later on today. But for now, many thanks to you all, and to SERA Labour Business.